Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science. I hope you're ready.
Well, you know I'm not, because you put me on the spot for this one, and I wasn't fully prepared for it, but you're like, hey, that's interesting. Why don't we talk about it?
I don't think it's just interesting. I think it's like a power move.
Okay.
That's not the right word. It's like a mic drop or something, to me,
captivating.
When I saw it, I was like, we got it. We have to do an episode on this because it's pretty powerful.
Yeah. So to provide, all 5 people that are listening right now, that joke never gets old, right? Yeah. It's tired, but it's not old.
Hey, that's 12 years.
Yeah.
Most likely.
So we're getting ready for this turkey management workshop that y'all have heard us talk so much about and seen some stuff about it on our socials.
I hope y'all went last Saturday, because he reminded me that this episode's not coming out until after it.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope y'all went. I hope I saw you there. That's a weird thing to say. But so Marcus and I have spent the better half of this morning just making sure that we're on the same page with all our talks, and just informing each other what we plan to present on as we alternate back and forth on these topics. And one of the things that I did, just a small segment of kind of my intro talk to set up everything that we covered relative to habitat management, is why does it matter? And what does it actually translate into when we implement these practices that we promote? And while we don't have a study that directly has documented before and after habitat improvements are made and how that actually changes vital rates, which of course would be the gold standard for this, we can piece together bits of published data from here and there to show, okay, well, we know that, for example, when hens nest in this environment versus that environment, or this vegetation structure versus that one, that nest success typically increases, right? So we can pull different little bits and pieces like that from the literature to try to make an assessment of, okay, what could we expect under the average habitat conditions for turkeys across the landscape versus if we improved all those different areas. So we improved, the nest initiation rate, the nest success rate, the brood survival rate, and so on. What does that actually add up to if we were doing everything to address all those limiting factors? What would that translate into in terms of gobblers?
Yeah, which is what all of us are here for, right?
Ultimately after.
We want a bunch of gobblers running around so we can enjoy our pastime. And, obviously we have some conservation motives as well, most of us.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I want to hear a turkey gobble.
Yeah.
I just thought of something. We save this episode because we're about to do the math, right? Based on what you've done, you've gone through the literature, what the endpoints are based on the literature, right? In these correlative studies for what we should be expecting out of these habitat management practices, what they convey to each vital rate, and what that ultimately adds up to. And to me, that's just a prediction of the experiment that I'll be starting next season. Where what I was saying, save it for, is unfortunately this kind of work takes a long time. 10 years from now, you and I need to make a pact. I hope wild turkey science goes on forever. If it went on 10 years, I'd be shocked. But we need to come back and record what actually happened when we went out there at a landscape scale and
Yeah.
applied habitat management. We will have measurements over long term of how many turkeys it actually made
Yeah.
compared to if we hadn't done it.
Yeah.
So let's see how far we are off. So we need to save this and remember it. And I'm relying on you because I don't remember it already. What are we doing?
Well, what I was gonna say to that is if I end up being right, how is that gonna make you feel about the countless hours that you spend on that experiment?
We got it. The gold standard now.
It's like you could have just asked Will for his
What
index
do you
card
think, Will?
for his index card calculations. That
I'm
cost
pretty sure that he wrote this on a napkin.
this
Can I see the napkin?
the
Where is
ink.
it?
If you combine the ink and the index card that it's on, it may maybe cost a penny to figure out.
Yeah.
So so yeah, and while you were going through that, something else I thought about.
What's that?
If we could calculate the same thing for what we could hope to accomplish using predator control.
Oh, now that would be interesting. Do we
Yeah,
have? I mean, I know we could use the quail literature to get a really good handle on that.
I think we'd probably have to use the quail literature, and then I know that there's some stuff from Dan Speak that we've covered on here before when we bring up the topic of predation and predator control that would at least address the nesting component.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything that shows conferred benefit to bird survival as a result of predator control. So maybe we'd have to lean more on the quail lit for that. But
Hmm.
I think we could come up with some guesses. I mean, like you said, it's just a prediction.
Right. But Speak's work when he was poisoning all the predators, they didn't show. He didn't see any effect on poult survival on that, right?
No, it increased the number of hens with poults, but not the poult per hen ratio.
Ratio. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to interpret what that means, but
Yeah, so their
uh,
interpretation was that it benefited nest success, but not brood survival.
okay.
So if a hen had
That's where
poults
I
with
would have
her,
landed just off the cuff, but
yeah,
I needed to think through that a little more before I went
so
there.
there were more hens that had a brood, but the brood size of a hen with a brood did not change.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Perfect sense.
Okay.
Uh, well, we should pin this one too because there's a really good chance that this long-term habitat study, one of the sites, I'm going to have habitat management crossed with predator management.
Mhm.
So there, we might have both,
Yeah,
so we could test your predictions.
that would be powerful.
Yeah.
But
So,
today,
so listen up.
but today, all we
Keep
have is my
keep it
simple
on your
math.
calendar. Keep it on your calendar. 10 years from today, we're going to re-record this.
Yeah, and before we get into this, I want people to know that it really is just kind of pieced together to kind of give a representation of what we might expect. So I would encourage you to not actually focus on the actual numbers that we present, but rather kind
The
of the
magnitude.
magnitude of the
Yeah.
difference. Yeah. So you want to do it?
Well, yeah, I think it's like one of these. Uh, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like an exercise,
Hmm.
right? It's just a simple exercise to give you an idea of how much,
It actually
based on
matters.
based on the literature and what the vital rate responses that people have measured. Let's do a simple exercise to see how much that would convey in terms of what we care about. And that's the
Yeah.
number of gobblers standing there.
And that's something that's become very clear to me over, the years of teaching is that it's absolutely a completely different thing to tell somebody that doing this action or that action is good for your focal species that you're managing for versus actually putting numbers on that. Numbers, for
Yeah.
whatever reason, it's just like human psychology, it makes it real and tangible.
Well, the other thing is it's not just putting numbers to it, it's also providing context that makes it meaningful. Like you telling me that 32 million acres of grassland has been converted to behavior house. that sounds like a lot, but then you say a whole Alabama worth of grass has been converted, and you put the context to that number that makes it mean something to me,
Right.
right? So, are you measuring this in Alabama's or
I couldn't find a way to. I tried. I tried.
Uh, well, I, when you showed me the slides, it was pretty powerful, and it led us
Yeah.
to pretty much spur the moment. Hey, let's record on this.
Well, I'm
And
glad you like my slides.
yeah, well, occasionally
I
you
don't
pull a
get that
rabbit
many
out of the hat.
y'all. I don't get that many attaboys from Marcus. So,
You know that's not true.
all right, you ready?
Yeah, let's do the math.
Okay. So here we go from egg to gobbler. So let's assume we got a starting population size of 50 hens. All right. So from what we see in the literature, a fairly typical on average habitat nest initiation rate is about 80%, right? So
Mhm.
about 80% of the hens will actually initiate a nest. So we've gone from our starting population of 50 down to 40 hens who are nesting.
Yeah, they're going to
Okay.
try to nest.
Average clutch size, about 10 eggs.
Yeah.
So those 40 hens produce 400 eggs. Our average nest success across a number of modern studies, and this was pulled from Londi et al. That we've referenced multiple times on this podcast, is kind of in the mid to upper 30% range. That means at least one of those eggs successfully hatches. Now, for this purpose, I just assumed that if a nest was successful, all 10 eggs hatched. So
Mhm.
that is a caveat.
Which we do typically see hatchability up in the 90+%
Yeah.
range,
Right. Right. Right.
but not always, I guess.
Okay. So we have our 40 hens nesting. We have about a 38% nest success rate. So that means somewhere around 13 of those nests will hatch. So that produces, assuming an average clutch size of 10, 130 poults. So 130 poults are hatched.
Mhm.
Generally speaking, in the literature, poult survival is about a third. So somewhere in the 30% ish range. So from those 130 poults, 39 of those will survive to 1 month. Okay. So from a
Not that
starting
many. Isn't
population
that
of
dwindling down a lot
it
real
is.
fast?
Yeah, we started with 50 hens. We're already down to 39 poults surviving to 1 month.
That's crazy.
The sex ratio of those poults is going to be close to 50-50. I know it deviates to a degree from that, but not enough to really include in this exercise. So half of
Well,
39.
this is napkin math.
It is, yeah, it is definitely that. So assuming a 50-50 sex ratio of those hatch poults, that means that 20 of the 39 poults that survive to 1 month are going to be male. And of those 20 male poults, about half again will make it to be a 2-year-old gobbler that blows your hat off coming in, that
Yeah.
runs to the gun. So from a starting population of 50 hens under typical scenarios that we see across the average property where wild turkeys are studied, we're going to produce 10 gobblers,
Mhm.
10 2-year-old gobblers. Okay.
Yeah.
So
50
now,
hens turns into 10 gobblers per year,
yeah,
but it's delayed 2 years because it has to be an adult gobbler.
that's right.
So that is getting a little bit hard for me to fit it in my head, but I think I'm there.
If you, I will say, never
Like
mind. I'm not.
there's some
I was gonna make a joke about shooting jakes, but whatever.
uh,
All right, so let's
I
go.
actually never have.
Let's.
So
I have.
there's that.
So
I
there's
have never
that.
killed a jake.
So there's that. I have. So with an improved habitat. Okay, so we've got our starting population of 50 hens. We've bumped up our nest initiation rate a little bit, and we've seen this in several studies. Particularly, you see this. You definitely see an increase in Texas. It's even more extreme than what I calculated
Mhm.
into this, but
Some of
Um,
those Minnesota
yeah,
studies,
those
or
Minnesota studies
there's
show that hens in better
yeah,
body condition have
yeah, and then that
higher
Doc Martin.
initiation rates. They nest earlier. It may
Hmm.
even impact clutch size a little bit, bump it up a couple eggs or
Yeah,
whatever.
I think on our last episode when we were talking about what it was nesting cover look like, didn't I
Yeah,
cover?
you did. You
I
mentioned it.
think I mentioned those two studies, so we can tag those again, and you can refer back to that episode if you missed that.
Okay. So yeah, we're bumping up to 45 out of 50 nesting instead of 40 out of 50 nesting.
Okay, so
So,
from 80 to 90%,
yep,
I
yep.
think that's reasonable.
I kept clutch size the same because there's not strong data showing an increase in clutch size that I'm aware of. It may be out there. I'm just not aware of it.
Yeah,
So
it's usually about 10,
I kept it
10
at
to
I kept
12.
it at 10. So 45 are nesting. That's 450 eggs. Okay, so 450 as opposed to 400 on the average
Okay.
habitat.
So in this is assuming that we've gone in and provided high quality nesting and brooding cover, particularly,
Well,
right?
we haven't even gotten to that yet because we're just at the initiation phase. So I haven't gotten to the
Okay.
higher.
Well, I was what's improving the body condition of the hens?
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, by providing more early successional cover across the property, we're assuming more food resource availability, less stress associated with procuring food resources, dodging
Mhm.
predators, et cetera, translating into a 10% increase in nest initiation.
Yeah.
Okay. So 45 of those will nest, and so we're bumping up our nest success rate to about 50% now. So we're going from about 38% to 50%, and that 50% number is what we have seen in several studies for turkeys on improved, we'll just call it improved range, right?
Mhm.
Like where they have the
Yeah,
resources
high
available.
quality
Yeah, properties that are
habitat.
generally managed with a lot of the practices that we recommend. So we're going to 23 of those 45 nest or hatching, resulting in 230 poults. And that was compared to 130 poults in the previous example. So just by changing that nest initiation rate by 10% and then changing that nest success rate by about 12%, we've gained an additional 100 poults.
That's pretty solid.
Yeah. So I still stuck with, let's see, what did I do here?
I would say you can keep doing your math or whatever you're doing, but I would say the nest initiation rate is probably the weakest link here
Yeah.
because I don't think it's been very well demonstrated anywhere.
Mm-mm.
What we do have some measurements of what we think is body condition, and we do have the example from Texas where
Mm-hmm.
when it rains, there's a huge jump in the nest initiation rate. So I think it's reasonable to assume it will change some. I don't know what necessarily is causing it to change.
Yeah.
So I would say it's reasonable to think that if we did better habitat management, that would increase body condition, and you'd
Right.
see that conveyed. But
And I think I was fairly conservative. I only gave it a 10%
yeah,
increase.
yeah, I think so.
So then
Where
on
you know,
it's also, while we're on this topic, another weak link is benefits to brood survival, because
mhm,
I'm not aware of anything that has directly said brood survival is this versus that in
yeah,
improved habitat.
but there are more anecdotes that say essentially that broods survive, or individuals even survive at a higher rate when they have access to a particular plant community
Mhm.
structure, right?
Right.
That
Right.
herbaceous dominated with open ground at the ground level, and a relatively large component of it is forb.
Right. That's right.
I would think that is a stronger point. We don't know what the effect size should be
Yeah.
necessarily,
That's
but I
right.
think you were still pretty modest with that.
Yeah. And I was modest with the poult. survival for the same reason. We don't really have good data on it, so I just bumped it up from a third, so like 33% to
Mhm.
40%. That's all I did.
Yeah. So 7% difference.
Yeah. So I bumped it up to 40%. So that means that of those 230 poults, 92 will survive to a month. Okay.
Okay.
Same sex ratio. So half are male. That's 46.
Now
Um,
remind me, is that twice as many?
yeah. Let me go back to that previous example. It was, no, it was more than that. So 39 versus 92.
Oh, wow. It's 2.5 times as many.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
So 92 surviving to a month, half are male. That's 46. Half of those, I didn't even increase the male survival rate or the Jake survival rate. Half of those will make it to 2 years old, and so that ultimately nets you 23 gobblers compared to the previous example of 10.
That is I mean, that's almost 2.5 times as many.
According to my math, it's 2.3.
Golly. Can you imagine there being 2 gobblers for every one? That's a
Yeah, it's a 2-for-1 special.
So, again, these numbers, we could argue over what that effect size should be, and I think, frankly, we don't have the experiment that we need to do that real well. And with the sex ratio stuff, like, is it going to be 50-50? I know there's some older work that suggests it's skewed toward male. And then
Yeah, if it was skewed
some of,
towards male, it'd make our numbers look even a little better.
yeah, and some of the newer work that I'm not sure if is published, but we've seen it presented at least, suggests that sometimes in some populations it's skewed toward female.
Hmm.
But
Well, if it was, we have no reason to believe that I'm aware of that improved habitat conditions would change that sex ratio.
yeah, that's what I was getting to. I don't know that it would be influenced necessarily.
Yeah,
Now, the relative survival might be,
that's true.
but
You have differential sex-based survival.
yeah,
Yeah,
but that wouldn't actually affect your math.
right. But
So,
you're being conservative and you're doing a really good job of putting caveats on this. But and I think that that's the wise and the proper way for us to approach this as scientists.
mhm,
But I will also kind of hedge this even further by saying I was pretty conservative with this. I
yeah.
feel pretty confident that that is a realistic expectation.
Oh, I don't want to undersell that at all. That was the reason I was like, when I saw it, I was like, oh, we got to do this. It's
Yeah,
a simple exercise using values that are within the range of expectation based on the literature
yeah,
to show a pretty simple point that you get more than double the number of gobblers from going out and doing the habitat work.
yeah.
Like, that's substantial. And that is also, we're talking about whether or not we could argue over the effect size. You also assumed that hen survival wouldn't change.
That's true. That's a really good point.
And you and I know that that's probably not a valid thing
Which
because we
in
have some data that we haven't quite yet, we're not ready to
Yeah.
present. But hen survival is probably increasing when you improve habitat.
So in this example, it actually wouldn't change the outcome of the number of gobblers produced because we're looking at a single year. But if we calculated this out over a 10-year period, it would have a compounding effect because not only are you producing more turkeys, but you're carrying over more turkeys year over year so that that population is growing both from the survival standpoint and the reproduction standpoint.
Well, I think you're right. It does have a compounding effect, but it would have an effect within the year because a lot of hens are dying during nesting. So, if you had 75% of them survive nesting versus 50%, I'm just making up numbers, but that would be a huge difference in the number of successful nests and broods and number of poults. So you're assuming that's stable, but
Well,
what
but
I'm
I think,
saying is if you affected nesting and brooding cover, you'd be affecting hen survival during those times. So
but
you
in
would
the
see that
single,
even within a year.
yeah, but in the single year example, I think that some of your benefits for hen survival are being captured by that improved nest success rate that I'm using. See what I'm saying? Like, I
Yeah,
think you go from that 38% to that 50% because more hens are surviving. Because some of those nests that failed under the 38%
yeah,
they failed because the hen died or
that's
was
true.
was killed. Yeah,
That's true. But a large portion of the nest failures are not including a hen dying.
that's true
So
too. Yeah,
yeah, they're not completely compensatory, but you are capturing part of that with
yeah,
this analysis. That's
that's
right.
right. That's right.
So it probably would be better, but we don't know how much better.
That's right. That's right.
That is a pretty compelling argument for getting out in the woods and thinking through what is missing and how can you improve it. We just had an episode that I think was really direct and clear. We've gotten a lot of really positive feedback on it about what nesting cover looks like. We're going to do the same thing for brooding cover. You mentioned a really good idea, and I don't think I gave you adequate props on the air that we should go out and do a video to help people visualize that and think about how they could measure it on their own property.
Right.
That is going to be live soon. It may already be. If it is, we'll have it linked in our show notes so you can go
Yeah.
see that video because it's really simple, the method that we
Yeah.
use to do this stuff. But, you know, if you're listening to us, hopefully you're doing that because you want to learn. I don't think they're here for this humor. They're certainly not here to look at me. So, uh, you know, we're trying to provide you resources and you guys are consuming it to get knowledgeable about what things are supposed to look like. Get out there, evaluate what's going on your property and think about how to improve it because there could be some really substantial gains fast from
Mhm.
doing that.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
That's what got me excited about it. We're talking about just the number of gobblers from one breeding season
Yeah.
that get turned out.
Yeah.
That is huge. It was almost like it's what, a half a gobbler per hen.
Yeah. I know. Oh, I remember finally what I was going what I was gonna say
See?
earlier
All you gotta
is
do is let me spill out a bunch of goobly gaw, and there it is. Your gem of an idea comes
so
back.
this is an unvalidated thought experiment. It's not a cause and effect, experiment that we've actually gone out and conducted in the field. However, and I'll caveat this by saying that it's anecdote too, but you have worked on properties, I have worked on properties where we have seen this magnitude of a response.
Oh yeah.
When you go onto a place that is covered in thick canopied forest, it's been having no fire, you have your traditional, cereal grain clover food plots for deer, is basically like all the openings. The roadsides are dominated in non-native pasture grass. Go on down the list of things y'all have heard us
Yeah.
talk
All
about
their
and
all their
rant about.
fields are pretty much pasture grass or ryegrass most
Yeah,
of the time.
a million times, and you fix all those issues, and within a short span of time, sometimes only a year or two, people are seeing multiple times more gobblers than they were.
Mhm. It happens constantly.
And some of it is through that improved reproduction, but I think some of it too, how quickly I've seen places respond, like seeing places go from a hunter on average hearing, two birds on the average morning, depending on where he's at on the property, to hearing six or seven in a year or two. I mean, some of that is just attraction. We haven't
Oh, I
there,
think
there
some of it has to be
it's not
because
just that we're producing all, I mean, we couldn't have produced those 2-year-old gobblers that fast.
yeah. Well, we may have made the Jake start gobbling or gob.
Oh Lord, you're gonna
I'm
start
sorry.
it. You better watch out. You're gonna start a new
You know
conspiracy.
what? I think we need to do an episode on Jake gobbling.
Hey, if improved habitat makes Jake's gobble more, I may not being as into habitat management as I used to be.
Yeah.
I don't want my Jake's gobbling.
Well, I was just thinking about that. What the group of Jakes, you know, the 8 Jakes that run around and bully everybody, and
Yeah.
they always run in on you.
Oh my
That's the
God.
downside here.
Have you ever hunted somewhere and called in the same Jake group multiple times in different spots?
Oh yeah.
That's the worst. It's like they're following you around.
They are. They're like, oh, there's a head over here, and she doesn't sound like she's doing very well. We'll go get her.
That's why I call in so many Jakes, is they go for the sick sounding hens.
That one sounds like a curly straw.
Hey, you know what? We need to send this portion of the podcast over to Yanni at Meat Eater. Did I tell you about that story from the
Oh
convention?
yeah, that he was talking about. We weren't very funny.
Yeah.
Nobody comes there for the humor.
He said he's recommended the show to several people, but said don't go there for the humor.
What they need to do is go here for the math. We do it on napkins. We provide context to the math. That's what we do.
Oh,
You know how many acres 32 million is? One Alabama worth of them, buddy. See, now I know the size of the state.
how long has it been since we've gotten a negative comment about my math abilities? I'm
It's
sure
been a minute.
I'm sure there'll be one after this episode. There's something I
Oh yeah.
messed up in there.
Oh yeah. People
But
are going to
hey,
be
if you're
bent
gonna
out of
leave a
shape.
negative comment, make sure you call out Marcus too, because he's had now 2 opportunities to go through this with me today, and he didn't correct it. So we're
Well,
in this one together, brother.
yeah. Well, just addressing some of the comments that we're getting. One thing I want to emphasize real quick, and I think it's related to this message, is people like for the instance the fire season episode we had with Craig. A lot of people had questions about how that was going to affect deer use of the property if you're burning,
Yeah.
and we're going to lose our deer hunting. Well, that's another scale dependent issue, right?
Yeah.
If you've got 100 acres and you burn all 100 of it in the fall and remove all the cover, well, sure, that could influence your deer hunting.
Yeah.
But we're not recommending you do that. We're recommending you burn a portion of it. And let's say you're on it, I'm just making these numbers up. You're on a 2-year return interval property wide. Which
Mhm.
how many properties do you see do that? Not very many.
Not very
Not
many.
not for all of the acreage. But let's just say for a minute you got all upland pine and you're on a 2-year rotation. Well, that would mean 50% would get burned in a given year. Well, you may only take a portion of that and burn it in the fall,
Right.
right? The whole point of that was that he has been leading this experiment. You and I have been playing a part in it, small part for me. But we've also done work on fire season and other studies, and we're trying to understand what you gain or lose from doing it at different times. And if you're have struggling with getting more forb cover, which would convey those benefits to the poult stage that you
Mhm.
did the math on a minute ago, you might want to consider expanding your burn window to include the fall,
Right.
because that's one benefit that comes from that,
You know,
right?
one thing I'd like to interject right here.
Yeah,
So those deer hunters that are complaining about losing all their deer cover and thus
yeah,
their hunting quality. Nobody ever says that about food plots.
that's true.
How much cover is there in a food plot?
Not very much most of the time.
Right. So that's all. So a lot
I
of
thought about
times,
the same thing. The other thing that I have seen personally, and I can't tell you how gratifying it is to me, like it's just one of those things for me that is intrinsically pleasing. I can't help it. But I have gone and burned an area during the fall and then sat there where I could see about 1 inch tall green stuff during late bow season
Yeah.
and watch deer walk around through that and nibble on all those little resprouting things. And I just have had a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah.
So my point of the whole thing is it's a scale issue because if you have 100 acres and then you burn 20 acres during the fall, you're not removing all the cover,
That's a food
right?
plot.
And it becomes a food plot, especially if you've had a response in the plant community. And if it's in a hardwood stand or a mixed pine hardwood where there's acorns falling, they'll mingle all through that and eat it,
Yeah.
especially if there's cover nearby.
Yeah.
So, when we're talking about some of these recommendations, keep that that in your mind that we're not telling you to apply it to all of the ground at the same time.
No, and we talk about too many practices for that to even be possible, right?
Right.
But we
Yeah.
don't. But yeah, so
Well,
don't be confused when we zero in on a specific topic and
yeah.
expand on that. I mean, we're not saying that that's what should be done everywhere. Just that that is one tool that you have.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and here's what you gain from tweaking the way you use that tool. And that was what the point of that episode. And that was fresh on my mind. But we get comments like that regularly. And I've gotten a number of DMs about the fire season stuff, that people were concerned about how it influenced deer hunting. And I have seen positive effects generally, but we're also doing it at a scale where we can observe positive effects. If you burn 5,000 acres during October, yeah, that might negatively influence some things.
yeah. Or if you make
Just
your
like it,
entire property a food plot, the probability of seeing deer during daylight on that is low.
yeah, yeah, nobody's going to plant their whole 100 acre. Well, I shouldn't say this. Some people might. That I wanted to take a moment. We got talking about comments, and I want to make that clear that we're trying to prepare you with information that you can use to apply these different things based on what your objective is in your context. And some things might work for you, and some things might not, and some things will be needed, and some things won't. And learning what the trade-offs are of these decisions, and hopefully can help folks apply it in their situation. And I think that's important for what we just discussed because you're trying to maximize the productivity of your turkey population when you're getting in there and doing this aggressive habitat management. And we've already shown with the napkin math that could have a real big impact on the population,
Yes,
right? And
absolutely.
we're not saying that all 100% of your property needs to be poultry cover because guess what? That's not good for other stuff, and then you're going to lose on those other vital rates, right?
Yeah.
So you have to mix them in an arrangement that maximizes all of them, with the trade off.
Well, and this is the whole reason that we put together the Turkey Habitat Management Academy this week
That's exactly right.
is because yes, we present all this information in kind of a siloed way because of the episodic nature of the podcast, but our goal with that workshop was to bring people together, in one place where we can cover it comprehensively and say, look, this is how this practice fits with that practice, fits with that practice, and then you end up with a whole property level management plan.
Yeah, it's like putting it all together in a comprehensive idea of
Because
how
most
to go
land
about
managers
this.
are aware of the suite of tools available to them. The hard part is the where, why, and how to apply them to certain portions of the property.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I really hope it went well. Doesn't that feel weird?
To talk about the future as though
Yeah,
it's in the past.
yeah.
I don't think I've ever done that before.
It's like a
But
mind warp or something.
before we close this one down, there was one other comment that I wanted to see if you could help me address.
Okay. Somehow I feel like this is a trick.
I went on another podcast last week, and they posted the episode to YouTube, and one of the top comments was, "I'm an avid turkey hunter, and this guy's boring."
I didn't want to say anything. Well,
So, do you have any advice?
You got to be funnier. That's one problem. Well, I think that's, we're trying to blend
You don't
science
actually
with.
have to address the comment, Marcus. Don't feel obligated.
Well, I'm not addressing the comment. This is more of a philosophical thing, but there are people that are listening to podcasts to learn. That's ours is probably more attractive to those types of people. And there are some people that are just trying to pass the time and listen to something that's fun to listen to.
And that's okay
right?
too.
Yeah, that's completely fine. And that's probably one of those people that comment. But we're trying to blend it. But, we're just not very funny people.
Yeah.
So, and we're also scientists. There are a lot of scientists that I could not listen to for an hour.
That's
So
true.
the fact that some people can listen to us for an hour gives me a little bit of hope that maybe we'll see the light at the end of the tunnel and start being more listenable.
We're ahead of the curve. If only ever so slightly.
Yeah. Well, one of the problems is we got to start doing math on something other than a napkin. I love when you picked up the thing that it was a note card, I think, but when you first picked it up, it looked like a napkin to me.
This is the actual napkin.
That's got a coffee ring in it.
Okay.
All right. I think we've digressed enough to call it for this one.
And I think we've probably talked to each other enough for one day.
Yeah, I agree. So another one that, is short, sweet, direct. I think it's good for us to do these thought experiments, and this one I think is pretty powerful argument for getting out there and getting some habitat work done.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks everybody for listening. Please leave a comment and tell Will that he is indeed funny and listenable. We would really appreciate that. I think he's kind of feeling down right now. So thanks everybody for the support. We really appreciate it. If we hadn't have been getting such positive feedback and encouragement and so many questions and so much interest, we wouldn't be doing this anymore. So, from a serious standpoint, I really do appreciate all of our audience and how engaged they've been and supportive of us. I mean, it's keeping us going.
I also want to thank them for how much habitat they're putting out there on the ground for turkeys.
Yeah, there's no question about that. If the folks that have filled out our survey and told us how much they're using this information to apply to land, I mean, we're, not that we're the root of it, but they are putting enough habitat on the ground that I do think we're influencing the needle.
I hope so. That was the whole goal, right?
That is exactly right.
Yeah.
So, good stuff.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.